77 years ago, Operation Overlord was a go.
The rockets landed pretty close to the hospital, and the beds were bouncing on the wards.
With a heavy toll for one local town.
We learned of the Bedford boys, and that was an emotional experience that forever changed our lives.
But it was a dedication decades ago that we'll never forget.
And this is a proud day for the people of Virginia and for the people of the United States.
And every day, more firsthand history fades.
We want to make sure that what the greatest generation did in World War II, the freedoms that they helped secure for the world, that must be remembered.
Along with the unknown stories of the bold and the brave.
They made a significant difference.
Tonight, we honor our heroes, carrying the torch with a debt we can never repay.
"20 years later, saluting service and sacrifice." Sponsored by Bojangles.
It's been 77 years since one of the most pivotal battles in World War II.
But this weekend is also the 20th anniversary of the National D-Day Memorial here in Bedford.
Good evening, I'm John Carlin.
And I'm Lindsay Ward. On June 6, 1944, 160,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. This massive invasion ultimately led to the end of Hitler's dream of Nazi domination.
But 2,500 American service members died that day, including 19 men from Bedford, a town that suffered the greatest loss per capita.
In tribute to that sacrifice, and so that it is never forgotten, visionaries undertook the building of all of this, the National D-Day Memorial.
And now it's been 20 years since that dedication, 20 years since President George W. Bush came to speak, since Bob Slaughter saw his vision come true, and since thousands of veterans came here to see it in person.
In the early hours of June 6th, at a rendezvous area codenamed Piccadilly Circus, Operation Overlord began.
The 154,000 soldiers who stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day were not expecting heavy fire. And yet, thousands died. Among them, the now famous and tragic story of the Bedford boys, 19 of whom died that day. They are the reason the D-Day Memorial was built here instead of somewhere else. Bedford, Virginia, now 6,000 strong, is very alive today. The tears have been shed and the stories have been told. And 20 years ago, Bedford hosted the world at the dedication.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leanne Necessary.
And I'm John Carlin. It is a reverent day here at the National D-Day Memorial for its dedication. We heard from military leaders from Britain and France, and from Bob Slaughter, the man who captained the memorial project from the outset.
We had about 400 yards of flat sand to cross. I mean, most of the A Company got on the beach, but then when they got down on the sand is when they got clobbered.
I remember taking it all in from atop a scissor lift, looking out over the men who had earned this memorial.
Wall-to-wall coverage that we put out.
I recently reached out to my then co-anchor, Leanne Necessary Brownlee.
It was just such an amazing event. It was just a sea of veterans, and just amazing. The emotion, the gratitude was just there.
My name is Frank Reese Mays.
Frank Mays of Amherst County took it all in from the ball turret of his B-17, and later survived an unheard of 35 combat missions over Europe.
We went through the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft fire I ever yet seen. Traces and flak explosions were so thick that it looked impossible to get through without being hit.
And even as we were doing our broadcast, Air Force One brought President George W. Bush to the Roanoke Airport.
It was a lot of excitement at the airport that day. For me, it was the first sitting president I've ever covered. He got off the plane, he waved at everybody, and we were all excited to be part of the D-Day dedication, even though we weren't in Bedford.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is how he pointed out that there was no better place for this memorial than Bedford.
You have raised a fitting memorial to D-Day, and you have put it in just the right place. Not on a battlefield of war, but in a small Virginia town.
I'm so honored that I got to be there. It's a great memory in my career, but also as a person.
Today, as America dedicates our D-Day memorial.
My own thoughts as well, and no doubt those of all who gathered in the shadow of the Overlord Arch some 20 years ago. While 20 years have passed since the memorial dedication, it's been more than 75 years since the day that Bedford fell to her knees.
In the heart of Centertown sits a drugstore where the Western Union telegrams came in one morning, informing the small town of its devastating loss.
Outside the Old Greens drugstore is the hustling sound of day-to-day life. But when you walk inside this iconic building, you step back in time. Black and white pictures, handwritten letters, and telegrams are just some of the artifacts the families of these men have on display.
On our wall of honor are the 20 Bedford boys lost in action the morning of the invasion.
2 years ago, Ken and Linda Parker turned this historic spot into the Bedford Boys Tribute Center.
We officially opened June the 1st, 2019. We've had 5,000 visitors, 45 states, 11 countries.
Visitors from all over the world have looked in these display cases, hoping to get a better understanding of the devastation that overtook this town.
The tragedy struck Bedford, and it came in here in Green's drugstore.
6 weeks after D-Day, on July 17, 1944, telegrams started printing out of this machine. Each one notifying a family their son was either killed or missing in action. The Western Union operator, a young woman named Elizabeth, reported the news that would change the fabric of this small town forever.
People literally were lying on the sidewalks crying. 19 of their sons were placed on the altar of freedom, and it's the day that Bedford fell on her knees.
Parker says it has taken decades for Bedford to heal, and it wasn't until just a couple years ago the community was even ready to open a tribute center like this.
What has shifted, it's from pure sorrow and tragedy to the nieces and nephews today of wanting to continue the legacies of their beloved uncles.
All of these personal effects of the Bedford boys are on loan to the Tribute Center from their families in an effort to keep their memories alive. Interestingly, Parker says there has been a plus side to the pandemic.
The families have stayed home more, finally getting to clean out the attic and the basement and downsizing. It never ceases to amaze us. If we see a stranger coming through the door carrying something, we know this now is a new relative we haven't met, bringing in more of the personal effects.
And as the collection of local and international history grows in this old building on Main Street, Parker says he has no plans to stop educating anytime soon.
When the 7 days we're here every week, we don't know what to expect going through the door. So for us, it's a total new day, new surprise, new history lesson, new opportunity to educate our youth. So it's quite humbling and very rewarding.
While the small town sacrifice was significant, others in our area were lucky enough to return home.
But for one Lynchburg native who was just 17 when he hit Utah Beach, nothing could prepare him for the brutality of war.
10 News reporter Tim Harfman spoke to the former GI about his experience.
Thumbing through books, awards, and photos,
That's me.
Memories of serving in World War II come flooding back to 95-year-old Bill Sisk. The Lynchburg native joined the Army during his senior year at E.C. Glass High School, and as a teenager landed on Utah Beach in Normandy shortly after D-Day.
I didn't see any Americans killed at all. The only thing we came across was German POWs. That was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
A radio operator in the 90th Division, Sisk was shot in the leg 1 month after putting boots on the ground.
As soon as I got hit, they pulled me on the command car and started working on him as the best they could.
He was taken to a nearby hospital where doctors planned to amputate.
I was lucky, I guess. The Germans put the rockets over on us. The rockets landed pretty close to the hospital, and the beds were bouncing on the wards. And the medics and the nurses were underneath the beds.
He was evacuated to Oxford, England, where medics saved his leg. The GI returned to his infantry. Marching into Germany, they fought in the Battle of the Bulge, found salt mines full of German goods, and liberated a Nazi concentration camp.
The furnace was still running. They had tried to get up in the furnace as fast as they could, and they couldn't get up fast enough.
Sisk was in the battlefield as Germany surrendered in May 1945. He then returned to Lynchburg, went back to EC Glass, and graduated high school. His daughter, Martha, is a retired educator who used materials like his handwritten letters.
A clear, beautiful afternoon, middle of the day. Things happen very fast.
To teach students and her own children.
Very proud of Dad. And when my boys were 18, I thought, my goodness, what my father went through at my son's age, it was hard to fathom.
Sisk earned the Legion of Honor, Purple Heart, and other prestigious military awards. He also met former Vice President Mike Pence at the National D-Day Memorial. To him, serving country was a way of life.
We just got the idea that's what we wanted to do.
And hopes future generations do the same.
Patriotism, believe in America, honor the flag.
Remembering stories that often go untold, the critical role of both women and minorities during World War II and their lasting legacy here at home.
And later, another well-known veteran, gone but never forgotten. What one local organization is doing to help others in his honor.
We honor their sacrifice every year, but it's also important to remember everyone who served.
And both women and minorities were key to America's war effort.
10 News reporter McKinley Struther takes a look back at some of the forgotten heroes from our region.
The longer we study the history, the more awareness I think we get of what hasn't been told.
Many people's worlds collided in battle during World War II. We know the stories of many great nations fighting in combat. Few know the stories of women and minorities whose worlds forever changed.
And he said, get me out of here, don't let me die here.
So many men did die during World War II and D-Day, yet so many lived thanks to the work of women like First Lieutenant Evelyn Kowalczyk.
When she first signed up to join this air evacuation unit, she didn't even know what it was.
I wasn't drafted. I volunteered for the service.
She was one of 500 flight nurses who served during the war, specifically part of the 818th Medical Air Evacuation Transport Unit.
And they paved the way for air evacuations. It was so new.
She spent D-Day in the covering of a foxhole. When she emerged, it was time to work.
I just live every day with that honor and the pride that what I did.
2,500 American soldiers died on D-Day. Kowalczyk's team saved so many more, many that were part of another team often forgotten.
People don't always know the story of the 320th on D-Day.
The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, an African-American Army unit who flew these sort of mini blimps, if you will, on D-Day to defend soldiers landing on the beaches.
They are heroes, and they need to be remembered, and their story needs to be told.
One man who made sure their story was told was Roanoke native William Dabney.
Mr. Dabney was like that. He came home to Roanoke, started a business, raised his family, and was just a wonderful member of the community.
77 years later, and people continue to work toward equality and inclusion for both women and minorities, work many believe was critically advanced by the heroes of World War II.
They also showed that these women could go into those situations. They were very strong, they were very determined, they were very courageous, and they could make a difference.
I think we need to remember them as pioneers, not just of winning a war, but of the civil rights movement as well.
The last survivors of the Normandy invasion and history's worst war are almost gone.
What other generations are doing to keep their stories alive? Coming up.
As each year passes, more first-hand history is lost. It's estimated we lose nearly 300 World War II veterans every day. D-Day survivors are now well into their 90s, forced to salute their fallen comrades often from a wheelchair. But as 10 News reporter Jessica Jewell reports, a new generation is picking up the torch.
The National D-Day Memorial attracts all kinds of visitors, many of them children.
The kids are really fascinated by it.
Megan Smith's 4th grade class at Smith Mountain Lake Christian Academy, among many school groups learning about the events of June 6, 1944 for the very first time.
It's important to make history come alive for the students, to help them connect with it in a way that it's not just words on a page, it's not just dates.
The youngest generation learning about the greatest generation.
If you had visited the National D-Day Memorial when it first opened, very likely it was a D-Day veteran giving you the tour.
But those treasured first-hand stories are much harder to come by now. The memorial's Director of Education, John Long, estimates less than 2% of the 140,000 Americans who fought on D-Day are still alive. Only about 2,500. The youngest of those veterans now in their mid-90s.
We want to make sure that what the greatest generation did in World War II, the freedoms that they helped secure for the world, that must be remembered.
Left, right, left. And they're doing just that. School programs, commemorations for Memorial Day, D-Day, and Veterans Day, and daily tours often given by the grandchildren or children of the veterans who stormed the beaches themselves. The 75th D-Day anniversary in 2019 referred to as a last hurrah. More than 100 World War II veterans in attendance, but far fewer expected to be around by the 80th anniversary.
They were mobbed by people wanting to say thank you, wanting to introduce them to kids and grandkids so that a 10-year-old be able to say, I met World War II veterans. And I think that's important because the more of the younger generation who understand what happened in World War II, the more the legacy will continue on.
Carrying the torch to preserve the stories that must not be forgotten.
The legacy of a well-known hometown hero, credited with saving dozens of lives during World War II, lives on in Lynchburg. Desmond Doss was an Army medic who went into the Battle of Okinawa unarmed because of his religious beliefs. He received several medals, but also has historical markers in his honor. He died in 2006 at the age of 87. The Lynchburg Area Veterans Council has now converted his childhood home into a site that helps formerly homeless service members. Doss's heroic actions inspired the 2016 award-winning film Hacksaw Ridge.
Coming up, service and sacrifice, step by step.
The hidden symbols here at the memorial that are solemn reminders of that fateful day. With an average of 60,000 visitors a year, the D-Day Memorial pays tribute to the men and women who served their country in one of its most dire battles.
From the reflecting pool representing Omaha Beach to the bronze statues climbing the wall, 225 soldiers scaled the cliffs of Normandy, even though only 91 survived to fight at the top.
The most iconic feature here is the Overlord Arch, colored black and white like the symbol on Allied airplanes. It stands 44 feet and 6 inches tall to represent the date of D-Day.
A powerful reminder right here at home that on the path to victory, America and its allies had to pay a steep price.
So much sacrifice, one that we can never repay or forget.
That's all the time we have for now. Thanks for joining us.
Have a great night.